I wonder what you think is Swedish about Swedish poetry.
I think the directness of language is sort of a simplicity of syntax. I think a clarity of image that has resonance and heft. I also think that there's an awareness or a perspective of a sort of a cosmic perspective as sometimes a backdrop or integrated.
You have a co-editor and co-translator. How did it work in this case?
Jonas and I, I was in Sweden and we just worked kind of side by side, creating drafts, first drafts of the poems. We were extraordinarily productive over a couple of weeks, where we just sort of talked the poems into existence. After that, we just sent them back and forth over email.
Why do you think it is that we haven't had more Swedish poetry in translation in the US?
It's a great question. I don't know. I don't know why. And it is incredible to think about Tranströmer's influence and his widespread presence in the US. And I mean elsewhere too. It's been translated to over 60 languages. And I remember reading an article in a Swedish newspaper some years ago. There was a group of translators of Tranströmer's gathered together in Malmö and read their translation from their various languages. And at the end of the reading, somebody asked the question, of each translator, why is Tranströmer so big in China? And the answer would be, he's so Chinese. And then the same question, why is Tranströmer so big in the Middle East? And the answer would be, well, he's so Middle Eastern. And on, everybody said that. So obviously there's something about his work that is so open, so direct, and it has a depth of humanity and psychology that resonates. It is a mystery, actually. I don't know. I don't understand it quite.
Can you think of a point where English failed you as a medium of translation?
I mean, there's a couple of instances in this book. For instance, in one of the Marie Lundqvist poems, she says, I have heard the soft language of figs, while in Swedish, jag har hört det mjuka fikonspråket som hennes tänder lämnade avtryck i. So it goes, I translate it as, I have heard the soft language of figs in which her teeth have left marks. Of course, what is the language of figs? It is what's equivalent of Pig Latin.
There are all these contemporary Swedish poets, whom I imagine speak English. So why did they not translate these poems themselves?
I write poems. I would never translate myself. It would be a nightmare. It's enough to write your own work. To translate your own work would be like, I don't know. Tough. But then again, yes, most of them speak exquisite English, but maybe not quite good enough to translate into English.
When you said that Tranströmer is kind of the Swedish poet that every American or most Americans associate, with Swedish poetry, is there an American poet that most Swedish people think of when they think of American poetry, or is there one who's translated most often into Swedish?
No, that's a great question as well. There is, of course, Robert Bly, and he has quite a presence, and in a way, it's very interesting how the two connected. And I think this was in the 60s, and I think within a span of 3 weeks, they each had discovered each other. I think that Thomas had read a poem by Bly in a British magazine, and Bly had come across Thomas somehow, I can't remember exactly, but they both had written each other a letter, and that it sort of crossed the Atlantic. So that's it's sort of remarkable friendship and connection, and how they each brought one another across, you know.
Malena, thank you for your work and for being here this evening.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I want to thank everyone, Scott and everyone too. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful Minnesota evening.
Yeah.